You're listening to the Threadwork Collective on air. I'm your host, Liana Jean Manabog, artist, educator, and community builder. This show is where art meets activism, where local voices share the causes that matter to them, and where storytelling becomes a bridge toward understanding and belonging. We highlight the power of creative expression, grassroots action, and healthy dialogue to strengthen our communities. Because shared stories create shared futures. Okay, welcome to this week's edition of the Threadwork Collective on air. We are kicking off a special series this week. You might have caught the first episode that we did with KRCL on Radioactive with Laura Jones and Annie Paget, and it was the kickoff for the America 250 Book Club. So for the next 6 weeks, we're going to be jumping in and asking questions about the stories and the myths that we've been telling about the US, because so many stories are being spread around right now, especially with this big anniversary, the 250th. And for this series, I wanted to invite on air a special co-host, Setha Evans. Welcome, Setha.
Thank you so much, Liana. I'm so happy to be here.
So excited to have you. And before we jump into all that is the America 250 Book Club, because we can get off to the races with that really, really quick, um, would you tell people who are listening who you are and why you're here to discuss this with me and with all of them?
I would love to. So I'm Setha. I am someone who's really interested in collective liberation and transmuting the kind of horrific histories and karmic ripening of this country and all the things that have been whitewashed um, in our education system and in the ways that we have been isolated from one another, due to race and white supremacy and the whole kind of way that this system has been functioning dysfunctionally. So I'm really interested in shedding a light on all of that. I'm in a everlasting, lifelong journey as a student of all of this on my own decolonial journey. I'm of European settler ancestry. I am a woman who has a background in healing arts and movement and physical therapy. I started 25 years ago with my own business as a trainer and yoga teacher that helped me through a time when I was facing a lot of addiction and eating disorder. And that was sort of the life raft that I clung to help myself heal, kind of that full wounded healer experience where I was showing up better for other people than myself. But the experience of starting a business, helping people with their bodies, helped me heal and overcome a lot of the issues that I was facing that were really due to childhood trauma, lineage trauma, growing up in a society like America, I will say. And from there, I went on to become a doula and assisted women in childbirth at home and also in the hospital industrial complex for 11 years. I'm also a writer and an artist and a singer. And finally, I think like closest to the true essence of me, I am a woman really interested in the healing arts. I practice energy medicine. I guide women um, out in the wilderness and do kind of like vision quest, nature quest work, and always with an eye towards decolonial liberation and just truth seeking to find our real essence and come back to our humanity, come back to our earth based relationality and find ways of how we can be in relationship with each other in Indigenous models, in earth-based models of care, to care for our earth, to care for one another. So that's a little bit
Mhm.
about me.
Yeah, no, thank you. So many cool little rabbit holes I want to go down with that with you that thankfully we have gotten to go down as friends.
Yes.
But also want to let people know that we do work together with the Threadwork Collective. You're actually a board member on the Threadwork Collective board, which
Yes.
has been such an honor and so much fun to get to work with you on these projects. And this is our first radio public facing project that we're getting to do together. But the first of what I think will be many.
Hmm. Yes, I am so excited for that, and it has just been incredible to watch your visionary brilliance and abilities as an artist and a storyteller, and someone who really deeply cares for community as you've put together the Threadwork Collective. And I'm just so deeply honored to be here and that work with you. So thank you.
Likewise. Thank you. As we, I guess, kind of start to kick off America 250 book club, it's kind of a little bit of a, I mean, I don't know that misnomer is the right phrase necessarily, but it feels like a little bit of a misnomer name.
Hmm.
And
That was just coming to
so,
me as well.
yeah, it's kind of hilarious, but it was consciously chosen, I will say.
Yeah.
So,
I think we're
we
both laughing because have a um we have a really healthy appreciation of the disparity in the truth of American history from a civil rights and from an indigenous perspective, and how the whole idea of the myth of America and America being a place of democracy is really so harmful for people of Black and Brown indigenous race that have been so marginalized and really, horrifically treated in the history of this country. So I think, you know, there's there's like a little bit of grit and sort of wicked laughter in that, where we're like, America 250. Is this really something we should be celebrating?
right. Yeah, I think that's really well said, and I think I'm so excited to dig into this with you because we kicked this off with KRCL on just a couple days ago on Thursday, set the stage for this conversation, and then just kind of want to put a plug in for that. That at Thursdays from now through July 23rd, um, Mountain Time, so Thursdays 6 to 7 p.m. We're going to be doing this series, but the point of doing those on air there and pairing them with what we're doing here on internet radio is here we have the freedom to take the time that we need to really dig into a really massive topic that has it's feels like the many-headed hydra in some ways, you know?
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Um,
Yeah, I think what's coming to me now is another way to name this uh, ancillary conversation that we're having. This is like a complementary conversation that also is sort of an antidote in a way
mm,
to the debunking of the myth of America. It's that this as well as confronting the hydra and cutting off a lot of its heads, we may
mhm.
be also in this discovery of how we can put to rest some of the demons that America has raised, and historically. Hmm.
Yeah, well, and I think before we even jump fully into that, I would love I think it'd be really cool for people to understand how you ended up sitting here with me, like what your journey has been to understanding, decolonial anti-imperialist work. So if you want to give a quick primer on that, I know that's a whole other story in and of itself, but it'd just be really cool to help people understand how you ended up seeing this and ending up here.
Thank you so much. Yes. Um, so I guess I can start with that I was raised by parents who were in academia, and they were also artists, and they were definitely anti-war feminist, uh, of an anti-war feminist bent in the 60s and 70s. So I was raised without religion and with an emphasis on academia, and I definitely was raised a little bit more in the new age from my mother, who was really connected to our pagan British Isles sort of pre-colonial heritage before the Romans, and this idea of earth worship and goddess worship, and that revival of that was happening in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. I was born in 1978. I'm 48 now. So I kind of grew up through the first iteration of the New Age in the 80s. Saw a lot. But the things that were really highly problematic with all of those spaces and places. So even if look back or, at some point in my childhood or in my teen years, thought that I was having more of an alternative, um, being raised in more of an alternative way, is that there's so much to still deconstruct in all of those spaces because of whiteness. So, white feminism and white academia, the academic industrial complex, all the things that go along with how we want to deconstruct America. And I mean that I think I was thinking about that as a word in terms of this side conversation that we're having is this idea of like deconstructing America. You know.
Mm, mm,
Anyway, in my own experience, I definitely grew up with this really vituperative feeling and dysphoria of being in American society. I wouldn't stand in school for the national anthem. I was definitely um, rebelling against systems of power, and music and artists and literature were really informing me and inspiring me to do that as a teenager. Um, I also had the really good fortune to live in Arizona in the Southwest and be exposed to a lot of Native people and their lived experience of reclaiming their culture and also combating the genocidal histories and cultural genocide, cultural erasure that was still going on. And I would say that that really awakened me and also put me on a journey to try to become better and overcome the shame and the guilt and the paralysis that I also had to kind of reckon with as a white person of European settler lineage here in America. And so I became um, really, I just had an alarm bell ringing in me, and I was listening to that and understanding that I couldn't go on living the way I was living, living in um, a sphere of relative comfort and privilege, even if I came from um, a childhood and a background where, because my parents didn't go the straight road, we didn't have as much money. But it's still the privileges afforded me because of my whiteness are, such a real huge thing. And so it I just could not stay in the comfort of that life, and it's been a very imperfect journey, but it's one that I feel is the only way to be, and, I could feel the soullessness in the other way, and so even though, I don't profess to know everything, and everything I've learned really from incredible BIPOC women, authors, teachers, activists, revolutionaries, a lot of whom we're going to mention and put into the notes here. And um, I I am still really committed to having my own experience of rejoining the human family and not being someone who stays in the comfort of white supremacy, even though we might not name that in the friend and family circle that we come from as white people as being overtly racist. There is a deep undercurrent of racism in this country that exists that affects us all and that creates isolation and creates all sorts of nefarious fuckery and really um, prevents us from waking up and rejoining each other so we can help as all of our human relations in this time that the earth needs us so much. So that's just a little bit, but then of
yeah.
course I'm still on that journey, and so I'm imperfect, but I deeply care and want to be a part of this movement of resistance that's happening on a global level to bring Indigenous people back into land stewardship, the land back movement, the Black liberation movement, and so many other movements.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for kind of just giving everybody a rundown on what that's been for you. And I'm so excited to dive in. And there's going to be so much more over the next 6 weeks that we get to unravel together and explore both of your story as well as mine, and then our just broader human experience. I think.
Hmm.
Um, And then to your point that you made, do want to flag that we will be putting show notes in with links and author names or book titles so that anybody that we reference in this episode and episodes all throughout this whole arc, you will be able to access and find moving forward. So just keep an eye out for those in the show notes. And then let's jump in then, because we started kind of with the microcosm of your story, and we started talking a little bit about the myth of America, and um, really, kind of where this whole conversation has begun has been in the power of story and in the power of myth and the function of what those do in our individual frameworks and ways that we inhabit the world, all the way up to our collective way of structuring our existence, I think, as we know it, you know?
Mhm.
Um,
Yes. Yes.
so where should we start with the myth of America, Setha?
Oh, fuck. um, I mean, do you want to go back a little bit and just talk about situation in Europe that had been going on for a couple thousand years before uh, the late 1400s, when um, the masculine, the patriarchal religious forces of Europe that had really subjugated so much of the last of the earth-based tribal culture of Europe, were had sort of perfected their process of genocide and subjugation and the witch burnings and all that. To just kind of lightly touch on all that, to show that they were so well versed in all that that they were now ready to go out and bring that program or that genocidal project into, quote, the new world.
Yeah. Well, and I think this is going to be so interesting to dig into, because it does seem counterintuitive to start in Europe, you know, in the
Mhm,
1400s or 1300s or
mhm,
wherever we decide to start it, because people are
mhm,
like, what does this have to do with America 250?
mhm,
And ultimately, I mean, the way I see it, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, are that there everything that we are discussing has to be put within context of the larger human story.
mhm,
Things don't just pop up out of nowhere. So, like the founding of America, you know, in our 250 years ago, it's not separate from or disconnected from everything else that happened around it and before it. And it's really crucial to tie the founding of this nation to the themes, I think, that really set us on the trajectories that we are seeing play out today.
yes, yes, wholeheartedly yes.
Yeah. So, yeah, let's start. Let's go to Europe. Let's go to Europe together.
Okay, and I think what we could say is that the first myth that we can debunk or demystify is that 250 years ago there was a proclamation of, or a declaration of independence, and that this country, was the first opportunity that European men would have to experience the freedom and the democracy that they had been craving and that they had been fighting for so long. Like, that's really not quite what it was. That's sort of how it has been presented, because it's been through the gaze and the lens of their privileged experience, even if they're saying that they were coming from uh, persecution. And I think that we should just kind of open the lens a bit, like you said, so that we can understand the levels of persecution. Because one thing that I see over and over is, in the Western and also white European context, like, persecution and discomfort, societal discomfort, is very different than the actual genocidal violence and harm that was perpetrated on people of color around the world as this colonial program went global. It's very, I mean, the two white historians often talk about the discomfort, and this is something of the male leaders who wanted their, quote, political freedom, and as though that's the same as what was perpetrated on the BIPOC people of the world. And I see that as well in um, white people trying to engage with decolonial work. It's like the discomfort of the decolonial work is something that needs to be felt to initiate more of a response of coming back to our human soul and stepping out of the isolation of white supremacy. And it's an invitation to begin to do that work, but it's not commensurate to the harm that Black and Brown people have endured in terms of genocide and erasure and cultural oppression. Like, it's not anywhere near. It's a completely different category, and it's a way that white people need to differentiate how to do their work, but understand how much greater the harm has been for our Black and Brown relatives.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I'm curious because it's this topic of doing decolonial anti-imperialist, stepping out of and recognizing the underpinning of racism that is embedded throughout all of the monolith that is whiteness, right? Like, and I do think it's really important to differentiate the difference between whiteness as a racist concept from the individual lineage. But that's where I think a lot of people who are trying to do anti imperialist, decolonial, and stepping out of like the identity of whiteness gets stuck, is because
Mm,
there's this identifying with the monolith that isn't actually who these people are. I mean,
mhm.
I'd be curious to hear your perspective on that and like how you were able to navigate getting out of this construct of whiteness and understanding that it isn't an indictment on you as a human being, while also reckoning with what the monolith of whiteness has done as a force throughout, this global experience.
Yeah, it's wow, thank you. It's such a question. I mean, I'm not I think it's an ongoing work that I'm not like fully ever out of it per se. But I think that there's a lot of key pieces. And one is to confront the discomfort, like I said, and also understand that it's far less important than the actual truth of the histories of what has been done in the name of that whiteness and colonization, what has been done to our BIPOC relatives. So that's number one. Number two is also to decenter, myself in any room and decenter the white experience. And I think that that's kind of a key jumping off point to um, understanding kind of the psychology behind the quote, founding fathers and the people looking for religious freedom coming to this country and their inability to decenter themselves when they encountered fully formed, fully organized, incredible, sophisticated, far more vastly sophisticated and technological societies, here than they were experiencing in Europe, and just not being able to decenter their own experience or their own religion or their own point of view. So I think there's a really there's a lot more, but I feel like that's a really big one, and that could also kind of take us to Europe.
Yeah. Yes. Okay, so Europe. Let's jump in there. Catholic Church, witch burnings, doctrine of discovery.
Yep.
There's a lot here. And we touched on this really briefly on Thursday. We gave you a teaser in that 20 minutes that we had to chat about it with Laura and Annie, but really want to dig into the significance of this as the foundation behind really the unspoken assumptions that nobody said out loud, but that were crucial to the establishment of this nation because it justified um, the claims that were made on the land, on the resources, on the people.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it really goes back to the shift that was happening around and even a few thousand years before the inceptions of the Abrahamic desert religions, so Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. So it's like um, 2500 BC, Common Era, and Islam, for Christianity, and like zero common era, and what, 700 around there for Islam. And before that, most of Europe was Paleolithic Europe, was in goddess worship. And so these were so many different tribes and languages, from the British Isles all the way to Turkey, all the way to Scandinavia and into sort of what we now know as West Asia, were really varied cultures with different languages and different religions that what they had in common was that they really worshiped the earth as female. Uh, that the idea of the goddess and the celebration of the feminine, nurturing, life giving force was sort of the most divine or holy connection. And that societies were oriented as more matrifocal or matriarchal. And so the family line was counted through the woman because she gave birth to the children. There wasn't as much of an emphasis on carrying the patrilineal father line. There wasn't this pride or arrogance, which maybe is an inferiority, saying that the father had to know that he was the father. Like, children were raised more collectively in, communal village settings. There's so much anthropology to support this. Maria Gimbutas is an amazing Eastern European anthropologist who's written so many books on this subject of goddess worship in Europe all the way into West Asia. And so when the Abrahamic desert religions kind of incepted for various reasons, there for the first time there were these sort of more warlike, masculine tribal cultures coming in that were now identifying and worshiping with a sky god, a male god in the sky. And the god in the sky was removed and more punitive and more judgmental. And he was giving these warrior cultures or warrior societies the indictment or the permission to take over land and to spread their religious beliefs in his name. So you were seeing these early cultures that had a warrior sect and a priest sect. And the priests were the closest to God, and they were giving the okay for the warriors to enact, killing everyone that didn't believe what they believed. And so it just took generations and generations away from this connection with the earth and this idea that we're all one being and we're all connected to the web of life. And that instead now there's this hierarchy where it's the male god in the sky first, and then it's the male, you know, king or priest and the male head of the family, and then women, children, people of other races, animals, all of that start to come, second and finally last, and are not considered as human. So we run up against this again and again with the, you know, the white supremacy and Zionist culture that is able to continue genocide. It's really easy to understand the kind of the horrific nature of killing a whole other human culture when you don't think that they're human and you don't think
Mm,
that they're like you. And so therefore, killing them is not really such a profane act. So I think
right.
that that's where, like, just to a lot of my reading and understanding, and you and I have met many long conversations on this subject. I think that's where a really first important, huge, crucial rift happened culturally in that sort of pre-common era, 2500 BC ish, and even earlier um, time in Europe, West Asia, when the male sky god came in.
Mm,
And then, of
yeah.
course, the Romans sort of co-opted that, Christianization, and brought um, Emperor Constantine in 300, 304, 312, Common Era, converted Rome from a polytheistic nation to monotheistic, and converted Rome to Christianity. And then that really spread across Europe. And so that is what actually kind of decimated the last enduring tribes of Europe that still were pagan, that were still connected to the matrifocal kinship of the goddess earth worshiping culture. And so then you just start to see um, a lot of um, a lot of genocidal behavior starting.
Mm. Yeah, well, and to your point about the lenses, the stories that created the lenses that justified reclassification of certain individuals or groups of wholesale groups of people as other than human, um, as a means of psychological protection, honestly, for the people who are doing the harm. Because then you don't
Absolutely.
have to reckon with it. If you are able to see that the person you are harming is in fact a human being that is equal to you in value and worth, that is a different kind of a reckoning than if you're getting rid of something that is not seen to be human. Because whatever story or myth you've adopted has allowed you to justify it that way.
Yes. Yeah.
So,
Yep.
with that as like a massive rift point, and then a really key foundational component in that we are bringing forward now into the founding of America, it's such an I don't know exactly how to say this. Maybe a tragic irony that the message that the story around the founding of America is that of dignity and freedom and no taxation without representation and all of these battle cries that I've heard my whole life, right?
Hmm.
Um, but then to put that messaging next to the context on which the U.S. was founded, it is, I think, a tragic irony. Doesn't even feel like it quite gets anywhere close to the core of what that actually is. Maybe hypocrisy is a little closer to it, you know.
Hmm.
Um,
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, I would love to hear any of your thoughts on that as we continue to, I guess, kind of look now from that founding into the myth that we've woven that we now are inhabiting still today.
I think it's just this really millennia old imprint, like we've been talking about. So, once Rome Christianized Europe and really perpetuated these early genocidal behaviors, and the Dark Ages descended, um, the feudal system was put into place, communal land owning was really shifted, and the nobles and the monarchy controlled all of the land, and then the peasants, feud um, or serfs, feudal serfs, were able to farm the land, but had to pay taxes, had to pay goods, had to pay in their labor. The land was no longer held as collective, right? And it was owned by a few, and the whole peasant class was really created. And then also in that time, um, the religious fervor and the misogyny of that religious fervor was so intense that it created the Inquisition. The remaining, women who had their craft and healing arts of midwifery, of herbalism, of connection to the land and to the divine as sort of protectors of their community, or respected wise ones in their community, and men too, absolutely. And also people of gender fluid, you know, sexual identity were all
Mhm.
targeted in Europe in those times of the Inquisition, the burning times. So all of that was going on. And you had like a whole continent that had spent 2 millennia really perfecting these subjugation methods, the interrogation, the gaslighting, the indoctrination, the like we have a joke that the patriarchy is it's it's just such a violent machine, but it's really not that smart. It just likes to take things and turn it on its head. Everything is just like backwards day with the patriarchy. It's like, it's not good, it's evil. The earth is not sacred, it's dirty, or we're not connected to her, and it's not a living being, and so we can just extract from it. Or, women are not holy givers of life. They're impure, and they're the, purveyors of original sin. Like, they're not really creative. They just
Mm.
like to turn things on its head. And so once you can kind of see that, you can start to see through all of the myths and all of the lies they perpetuate. But so I just think, if you want to take it from here, I'll just kind of, the last thing I'll say is, it's just so clear to me that Europe, and the sort of the masters and the architects of 2,000 years of that kind of domination were really ready with their new technology and, naval fleets and all that, to go out and to practice this around the world, and not see original inhabitants of any of the places that they were going to Indigenous Australians, to the Maori in New Zealand, to all of the incredibly sophisticated nations in Indigenous Abya Yala, South America, or North America, Turtle Island. The same, really the same thing happened. And so there is the myth that we were brought up on in American schools, because they're writing the history books to center the persecuted or disenfranchised few men that wanted to practice a different kind of religious freedom. But when they came here, they committed genocide. They created the transatlantic slave trade. They abolished, all freedoms for all people, except for the white men who were writing the Constitution, who were culpable for the Indigenous genocide that occurred here, who were slave owners, and who didn't give women their rights. So it's like, that's that's the truth. That's the
Mhm.
truth behind the myth.
Mhm. Yeah, well, and I keep coming back to this idea of story, because people are like, "Why?" I mean, I don't think people understand the power of story, and I feel like a little bit of a broken record on this, because I said this on Thursday, I'm saying this again now, but it's because it's such a core foundational piece, is that the stories that we adopt, whether we've opted into them or whether we inherited them by nature of what we were born into,
Mm,
shapes the way that we see the world. Like,
yeah.
it also goes the same way language shapes the way that we see the world. And it's been so interesting, as I've done more learning about different languages and the ways in which, in essence, the language creates relationality or strips our perception of relationality. Like, it's so much easier in other languages, and I think Robin Wall Kimmerer talks about this in Braiding Sweetgrass, to see the connection that everything has to everything else because it's embedded in the language. So every time you speak it, you're reminded of that connection. And by speaking that and having it constantly be something that you are reaffirming and reminded of, it is much more difficult to forget that and live in ways that dishonor or deconstruct and wholesale get rid of that, right? Whereas in English, it does feel like we have to do a lot more work in order to establish this concept of we are all connected, we all live within this web. And thus we end up with this hyper individualist culture in which we now live, stemming from, and growing from this assortment of myths that underlay the founding of the United States, as you so eloquently laid out, kind of what all was happening, that has been left out of the story that we were taught in schools. And it's something that actually has stuck out to me so strongly, because you know I've spoken to you, Setha, about this, but as I've done more work into reconnecting with and reclaiming my Filipino ancestry, I think one of the biggest rage points that I continue to find is, one, the portrayal of the Filipino people as just these little sweet, simple, kind, soft, whatever, very stripped of power and dimension. And then the second is, a lot of the pages and groups that I've plugged into with people who are doing such amazing work to pull back the Filipino myths and stories and lineage. continue to ask the question, well, like, why do so many Filipinos still sing the praises of the United States and say that they love America, even to the point of saying that they're so glad that the US came to the Philippines? And it does go back to the stories, and the stories that are told create justification for the people committing, whatever. In this case, I'm going to say atrocities, whatever atrocities they want to commit. But then also, if they can get the story to be bought into by the people whom they are subjugating, I mean, you do end up with a net end result of people going along with this is just the way it is. And look at all the good that we've benefited from because of this. And it's, I mean, honestly enraging in lots of ways to look at how deep that indoctrination has gone and how embedded within our collective DNA the myth of the city on the hill that America has become.
Oof, yeah, I feel that so deeply. Thank you for speaking that and for naming that and for the incredible reclamation work that you're doing to reconnect with your Filipino heritage and just bring that truth and dignity back to who you are and where you come from. Um, yeah, it just reminds me of the hypnotic power of religion and that that is such a original story, original story of primacy of myth. And when you go around the world sort of armed with that kind of archetypal myth making as a missionary, as an army, and you oppress people and take everything away from them, but then give them this story in its place, they will be forced to reckon with like forgetting who they really are. But the thing is you can't suppress it entirely. And that's why the renaissance that's happening now is the proof and the result of everyone around the world globally who survived these colonial projects and the incredible warfare and that has been enacted globally. So it is also really heartening to think that like you at the foremost sort of bead on the strand of your lineage are doing this work, that I can be doing this work, that there is this global resistance movement that is in defense of all life and protecting the sacred sites, protecting the original instructions and cultures of indigenous wisdom that we need. We need now because the myth of America is in such a rabid decay of entropy. I mean, it's really like Caligula, Mad Emperor, dystopian end times. And it's so accelerated. The destruction is so accelerated that, I mean, I think most people are just in either a full checkout or they're in a numbness, or they are in an indoctrination of, the fascist Christian right. Or, I mean, there's so many different hypnotic stories going on. And it's hard for people to find their way out of that. But I will say that at the same time, there is this incredible upwelling and upsurgence of the truth of the indigenous histories of all of us who had that connection to the earth before we were colonized, and so for European settler Americans, there's a lot of fucking work to do because it happened a lot farther back, and so there's a lot to unwind because that indoctrination, those stories were in place for a lot longer. But like here, um, for people here on Turtle Island in North America, so-called America, they've been fighting the advance of colonization on their homelands for 600 years. And so this is, or for African Americans here who are, lineage was brought here through forced chattel slavery and the transatlantic slave trade. Like that is something that cannot be denied in their lived experience. And so the more we get to see the truth and hear the experiences of everyone and the cultural reclamation of the truth and stepping away from the whitewashed history, I think we all kind of stand a chance of doing the collective reconciliation and healing that needs to take place, which you and I have talked a lot about. I mean, I think I would love to hear what you have to say about how the Threadwork Collective um, wants to emulate those kind of models of Indigenous governance. And I would also love to hear what you have to say about um, the the Five Nations and the Iroquois Confederacy and the Haudenosaunee.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you. Oh man, so many directions to take this. And I think first what's coming up for me is this this whole conversation really is an invitation. It's an invitation to, well, for us, with each other and with ourselves, but then also for anybody listening, it's an invitation to ask the questions around what stories are held and why you hold them so closely. And I've done that journey. I've walked that path of having to really ask questions of some stories that I held so closely and I was so protective of and was terrified to ask questions of. And I think I just am feeling like it's really important to voice. We are here to ask questions and to like share what we've learned and also to invite those who are listening in to start your own process of examination. So that's for one. Like I'm sharing what I've learned. Say that you're sharing what you've learned, but neither of us is trying to position ourselves as an ultimate authority to fill the vacuum of whatever authority currently exists there now. At least that's the way I see it and understand it. Um,
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. And right. And the impassioned telling of the perspectives that we're coming from. We don't want to leave anyone out. Everyone is welcome here in this conversation. Everyone is at a different place in their uh, spiral of healing or their spiral of kind of decolonial awakening. And um, we need everybody.
that is the
We need
thing.
everyone in this conversation.
We do, and I think it's really brave to have these conversations and be able to look. I mean, not unfeelingly, because there will be emotions and sensations that come up that are uncomfortable and looking at some of this, but unflinchingly looking at what all of this is and asking, so what does it mean that we've only taken bits and pieces of this story and threaded it together as the capital T truth? And what does it do for our understanding if we bring forward all the pieces that were, shoved to the side or ignored or pretended didn't exist? And now how does that inflect our story and our understanding?
Yeah. And I think there's such an opportunity for joy and for healing because in the uncovering of the undiscovered truths of the indigenous people globally who have been, culturally censored and tried, have tried to have been erased. There's so much wisdom that we vitally need now. So this effort and the desire to educate ourselves and to really understand the different stories, it actually opens the path for answers and solutions because
Mhm.
it just like the Chinese saying that women hold up half the sky, and just like in our efforts to create equality between men and women worldwide, the same exists between races. It's like we're missing a whole segment of human knowledge, ancient wisdom rooted in thousands of years of practice of how to care for the earth, how to care for one another. And we have the ability to learn from the incredible nations that have survived and are here to step back into power to share solutions with where we can go, how we can go forward from here.
Yeah. No, thank you. And um, thank you for asking as well, just kind of about where this is going with. I mean, I'm so excited to continue to unravel this with you with
Me too.
uh, this the whole journey. But yeah, with threadwork specifically, this myth and the myth of, well, America and what knowledge looks like and what success looks like and what validity looks like, what community is, what all of it has been so present on my mind as we've been co-creating this threadwork collective um, organization because and I'm really glad you asked this because it brings up one of the big core reasons that I think is a driver for analyzing the myths, which is if we don't do the work to understand the myths that we inherited and really pick apart and select the pieces that we buy into and set aside those that we feel are distorted, those stories and those myths will continue to influence the way that we show up in the world and the things that we produce. And so I've been thinking about all of it so much as I've thought about governance for Threadwork and how we establish like our board together and how we have people coming to work with us and how we create healthy community spaces because we don't want to replicate the same thing that's not working, which is a system of oppression, a system of hierarchy, a system of erasure, a system of some stories being more valid than others, a system of value only being tied to production, output, or what you can bring monetarily, financially to any given situation. And it's a lot to reckon with to create spaces that are conscious of and rooted in reality, but not pandering to these false gods.
Yeah, because I think that's how we expunge it. So it's like we're doing our individual work. There's been such a huge uptick in, you know, self development and spiritual work and the wellness world, and inherent in those spaces are still a lot of the white supremacy or sort of Christo fascist hierarchies. And we just have to recognize that, we're an ecosystem. And so these harmful traits of capitalist ideology, American society, the harmful parts of that really exist within all of us. And we have this opportunity to do this scary work and do the confronting work by coming together to create community with the intention of not perpetuating those hierarchies, like you just said, and also to know that we have to do the internal decolonial work and we have to do it also in community. And like it's going to show up, and we get to basically create the resiliency to keep the container strong and transmute it when it shows up. And I mean, there's varying degrees of that, right? Like there's um, people who are willing to do the work and that we would be in healthy community with to do that. And then there's also non-negotiables of
Right.
spaces that are perpetuating harm. But I think that the model that we're trying to come back to and remember has really been given to us as a working example by so much of the Haudenosaunee and five Confederacy nations of Indigenous governance, because they had so many practices of communal healing and reconciliation and kind of true democracy, right? Like they're recognized
Right.
as the longest standing democracy in the world. They had a tree of peace that they gathered around and came back to. They like a lot of these practices are being used in Canada now to come to in so-called Canada to come to more healing and reconciliation around all of the harm caused by the government, by the Catholic Church, by the
Right.
um, incredibly traumatic lineage of the residential boarding schools in Canada and in so-called America. Like if some of that work could be, not some of it, if all of that work could be provided in school curriculum, could be provided in the idea of reparations being given to all African American people, to restructuring, the architecture of our society and our culture, to making education free, to recognizing and um, understanding what has happened and that we're here to try to collectively change it. I think so much could be accomplished.
Yeah, I so earlier this week I had a phone call with um phenomenal educator and thinker Melinda Grisby. She runs her Instagram account Brown Girl Pride.
Hmm.
And I was actually talking to her about Threadwork Collective because I was just letting you know like I'm deeply invested and very interested in making sure that we are rooted in Indigenous ways of community and leadership, um, and and not falling into common missteps of hierarchical capitalist structures, you know? And one of the things that she commented when we were chatting was I found super interesting. I'd be curious to hear your take on this too, but she said that she kind of went through and looked broadly at how different community structures and leadership structures had been created, and they're going to be different. There is no like one size fits all template for that because of the fact that each community is so embedded in and connected to the land, and there are going to be unique needs and use situations for any community. And so leadership likewise isn't, going all the way up to like a president, for example, because the president couldn't possibly effectively lead for a community that has its own unique needs. Granted,
Yeah.
this is a much larger conversation to be had, but she talked about that more of like a hub and spoke model where there's core leadership in each space. And that space is not anti-hierarchical in the sense of there is never somebody who is making certain decisions and taking a place, but is also very rooted in this understanding of relationality and connectedness, and it's functional as opposed to hierarchical. So she really pointed out one of the places where like colonialism can creep in is in titles in a workplace, which are inherently hierarchical. And so I was like, "Oh, yeah, I could see that." And also, how do you work around that if you need to be able to describe to people what you're doing? Like, genuinely curious, you know? And she was like, "Just make it a functional title. You don't need to have, like, a hierarchy list of people, but you can understand what each person's function is in service to the larger community, and in doing so, remove the hierarchy while also having it very clear who holds what roles." And, I thought it was really interesting because she mentioned that colonialism did something that up to this point had not been done, which was it did a really good job of coming into the systems in which it eventually took over and replicating it so that the system would feel familiar, but but inverting or subverting the key tenets that made the system integrous. So that to me is really interesting in this larger conversation of like looking at the Confederacy and looking at this model of leadership and how this all works, and then looking at now what we have here with our model of governance and saying, well, what happened? You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
so I don't know.
Mm.
What do you think about all of that? Do you?
Um, it's so much came up when you just spoke about all that, but definitely the modeling of systems of support with functional titles versus hierarchy so that the purpose is for collective expansion versus domination or control. And the idea, when you were just talking, Nikki Black, who is a really incredible um, liberation educator, African American woman. She's a womanist, and she has a lot of educational content and does coaching for all people, but also for white people. And she always talks about Etta James, who's a really powerful civil rights movement leader,
Mhm.
saying that this is a new era of leadership where every person gets to come into leadership and we get to trust each person. I think this is also a really indigenous model that I've heard um, different indigenous friends talk about, that each person has their own leadership and self-determination, and we trust that. So we're not depending on one person for leadership. And you and I talk about that a lot in the context of this imagery of like a council of matriarchs, and that we share functionality and we share titles. And I think that would just be such a revolutionary system to introduce to the utterly fucked system of hierarchy that's happening in this country, the just the racist system of hierarchy and misogyny that's happening. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yep.
So, I mean, there's so much more on that, but it's how do we crowbar out this barnacled, cancerous, fixed, calcified ideology, and wrest it from the hands of the old white men who hold the power, who are still willing to take us hell bent on this course of destruction, who are taking pride in the destruction that they wreak because they are still captivated by this model of holding power. And that really, I think underneath it, well, I think we've all seen this, is just such a deep fear and insecurity
Mhm.
in who they are, and that has been instilled for generations and maybe even millennia. Like that the ruling class is like they're coming to take it away from you, so you have to hold on to it, and you have to hoard it, and you have to hoard the wealth, and you have to extract, the wealth, and you have to stay in power because everyone is an enemy, and it's that is so dehumanizing, and I think it creates the the psychopathy that we're seeing, which perpetuates genocide on the scale that we're seeing it. From
Mhm.
the capitalist, fascist, Zionist, white supremacist
Right.
camp.
Yeah. Yeah. 'Kay, I think we're probably at a point where
Yeah.
we're gonna start wrapping for today. There's so much this has been so good, laid the ground, so much more to dig into over the next 5 weeks that we still have coming. Um, and I guess just before we wrap up, is there any final takeaway that you would like to leave with listeners from today's discussion, Setha?
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed this discussion. It's like lifeblood for me.
Mhm.
And I just think that kind of the fearless inquiry of reorienting ourselves to believe that we're in integrity with all life, that we all belong to the web of life, that we are coming back to the remembering of who we all are in a human context, which is connected to the earth, caretakers of the earth, protectors of women and children, and that the awakening that we can have if we decide to go on this journey and start to read and listen and be inspired by so many of the incredible BIPOC women and activists that have been heralding and championing this movement for 600 to 5,000 years, whose stories that we want to resurrect, whose stories exist and are being um, brought forward into the light again, can give us such a renewed faith in how we're here to do this work together. And it's not easy work, and it can be confronting work, but there's also what I've found that this work really reunites me with or realigns me with is the fact that like I'm part of the human family. I don't have to stay in isolation. And it's a learned muscle of just stepping outside of the discomfort that really is the indoctrination of of the hetero patriarchal capitalist, you know, war machine that we've been told is a safe place, that we've been told is America, that we've been told is our home. But when we step out of that, it's not into, the dark, scary depths. It's actually into a reunion with life force, with vitality, with our human family.
That's beautiful. I love that, it's not even an image, it's a felt sense, just reunion, you know?
Mhm. And
Um,
I would add too, just that there's so much that is seductive and enlivening and impassioning about that, like it's a revolution and it's a spiritual awakening, and we've had that at many times in our human history, and this is another time where that I think really has the potential to happen and is happening. And it's awakening us to gifts that we've really forgotten about for a long time. And just the last thing I'll say is that that really ties into our creativity and our artistry and the ways that we can find play and joy and creativity as we continue to unwind the myths and come back together in humanity in that way. And that's really what a big part of the Threadwork Collective is about being able to come back together, like in trade and in collaboration, in artistry and creativity, with all of this subject matter.
100%. Yeah, and I think what I wanna leave kind of is you set me up perfectly for Stockton Malone, thank you, Setha. Um, but this is brave work, it's
Mm,
necessary work, and it is where we start the work of community because it is uncomfortable to ask these questions, and I have lived very personally what it is like to have to face the myths and the stories, and honestly, even like the fantasies and the lies and the delusions that I created to live in so that I wouldn't have to see the things about myself that I did not want to see. And what carried me through that was having community who was able to hold me and witness me and offer me a place of belonging as I did that work. Because I, at my core, have always been who I am. And I mean, this is a philosophical argument, right? Like, who knows? I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole, but I do believe we each have our core essence, our core self,
yes.
and we can be held and witnessed in that. And sometimes it's really uncomfortable to have to recognize the roles that we've played in upholding the myths that we've lived in.
Yeah.
But
Yes.
that is the sacred work. And that is our duty and privilege, honestly, because it's so liberating to do it.
Tell it. Tell it, sister.
So,
Absolutely. All the way.
well, thank you
Thank you.
so much, Seitha, for everything you contributed. Thank you to everybody listening. This was the first of our 6-week series of our America 250 book club. We will be back next week, Thursday on KRCL, 6 to 7 p.m. Mountain Time. You can tune in there and listen. And then Seitha and I will be back with the Threadwork Collective on air in our deep dive, which pairs with what we're doing with KRCL. A week from today, a week from Sunday. So tune on in. We'll drop all the links and all the names and notes and books for you. And you can find us online. So you can find Threadwork Collective at thethreadworkcollective.org or on Instagram at the Threadwork Collective. You can find me at Liana Jean on Instagram as well. And Seitha, where can they find you if they would like to reach out to you?
Thank you so much, Liana. I'm at The Sacred Senses, at The Sacred Senses on Instagram. I had to think about that. And my website is thesacredsenses.com.
Okay. Amazing. Well, thank you so much. And I guess happy 250. And we'll catch you guys next week.
Thank you, my love.
Bye.
Bye.
You're listening to the Threadwork Collective on air. I'm your host, Liana Jean Manabog, artist, educator, and community builder. This show is where art meets activism, where local voices share the causes that matter to them, and where storytelling becomes a bridge toward understanding and belonging. We highlight the power of creative expression, grassroots action, and healthy dialogue to strengthen our communities, because shared stories create shared futures.